Hello, my name is Evan DeMarsh. I'm the editor of the Trends Journal. I'm here today with Scott Horton. He's the director of the Libertarian Institute and author of Provoked, How Washington Started, the New Cold War with Russia, and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. I'd also like to congratulate Scott on last month being awarded the Excellence in Journalism Award from Integrity Media. Congratulations on that, Scott.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that.
I want to get right into it with what's going on in Gaza. And the last time we spoke, it was about maybe 2 months ago. And you said when a US president wants to end the killing in Palestine and Gaza and the West Bank, he can get it done. He can pressure Israel into doing that. And one of the first things that you posted on X was lesson. This is a quote, lesson. Any American president can make Israel stop at any time. And you obviously mentioned about Trump's ceasefire deal. Do you think that the killing for what we've seen is over in Gaza? Or do you think that this could be the start of a lasting peace?
Oh man, I mean, I have to say I'm not sure how else to describe it. It sounds kind of silly, maybe. Hopefully pessimistic. I mean, the strongest reason to think that peace could hold is that Trump has really put so much on the line here. And so obviously the Israelis have a history of breaking ceasefires whenever they want and doing whatever they want. And of course, Hamas is not really a government. They're just the strongest gang in an Israeli concentration camp there in the Strip anyway. And so they have competition from Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the leftists, the Popular Front, and these groups. So one of them shoots off a rocket, then Israel has a pretext to claim the ceasefire is broken, something like that. They killed a guy the other day because they said he was approaching the yellow line, except of course there's no line. So the guy didn't know that he would, there's no reason to think he was trying to attack Israel or anything, but they have shrunk the Gaza border by however many kilometers, quite a few, and reduced the zone where people are allowed to go by a much smaller degree there. So there are, in other words, there's just 1,000 tripwires, right? There's if the Netanyahu government is just waiting for an excuse to start it all back up again, then they will find one. If Donald Trump has instructed Netanyahu, on the other hand, that, listen, man, I'm really serious. I'm not going to spend the rest of my presidency with you doing this. And so this is going to stick. We're going to find a way to make it stick. And we're going to allow small violations if we need to, et cetera. That's what it would take, essentially. Now, the thing is, you have things where, technically they're not in violation, but the Israelis make a big deal about it anyway, like coming up with all the dead bodies of the hostages. Some of them are not that readily available and may be buried under rubble and have to be retrieved before they can be turned over. And they had already discussed this. And then the Israelis decided to cut the aid coming in sort of under the pretension that the Hamas was keeping these bodies and not turning them over when they're going as fast as they can. And even American officials told the papers that they believe that. So you can see how they can just exploit any kind of excuse if they want to. There's also the question of what is supposed to happen in this. Well, okay, before that, there's the question of Donald Trump's politics here, where today he said that if Hamas doesn't stop killing people, then maybe he's going to have to send he said we will have to go in there, implying American forces will have to go in there to kill them. And yet he said yesterday, I think maybe it was the day before yesterday, that yes, Hamas is executing people, but it's okay because those are really bad groups. In fact, we know that Israel, according to Avigdor Lieberman, the former defense minister, is the one who ratted them out. And it was widely confirmed in Israeli media that Israel was backing gangs that were connected to ISIS as long as they were against Hamas during this thing. And presumably those are the gangs that Hamas is now taking out and killing, that Donald Trump put his rubber stamp on it yesterday. And now he says maybe we'll have to attack. Maybe the U.S. will have to go to the Strip now if Hamas doesn't do exactly what he wants. And he also had claimed that Hamas agreed to disarm when that was not part of the deal. And they never would have agreed to that. It's the only thing they have left is they still have their guns. They're not going to line up and turn in whatever arms they have, which are very light arms anyway. Their biggest armament is probably an RPG, right? Or a Katyusha rocket, a makeshift type Katyusha rocket or something. Doesn't seem like they've fired one of those in a very long time anyway. So, and then is the question of the long-term or even medium-term future of the Strip. What's the future of the territory for the next year? It would, I saw a headline, I'm sorry, I didn't read very carefully, but said that the Gulf states had pledged something like $70 billion to rebuild the Strip. But I think actually that was at antiwar.com. But then that's over years. And who is actually going to turn that $70 billion into concrete and into bulldozers and into manpower and into the actual rebuilding of that place? I mean, it's unbelievable the devastation that has been unleashed on the place. It looks, like Dresden or Nagasaki or something. What it's going to take to make a livable place out of it again, I don't know. And then does anyone really expect the Israelis to let Trump, build never mind the Riviera, but even rebuild the Gaza Strip at all for the Palestinians, not for them? And it seems like their incentive is to just keep going. I saw John Mearsheimer say Trump is mistaken if he thinks that he's gotten what he wants here, because the reality is Netanyahu is probably going to just go ahead anyway, restart the war at his leisure when, his reserves are rested up and ready to go again, claim that Hamas is not decimated and we can't stop till they are, can't stop till the Palestinians have been transferred somewhere. And then if Donald Trump has anything to say about it, he'll just sick the lobby on him. And at the lobby in America, they'll just do what they have to do to hem him in here and not give him any choice. And I'm not sure about that. I will point out one more thing before I finally stop rambling, which is that the editor-in-chief of Haaretz, I'm sorry, I forgot the guy's name. I just read it the other day. He has a piece where he says, I think this may have even been in the headline, that the ceasefire proves that America doesn't care what we do to the Palestinians. That's Royal Wees. This is the editor of Haaretz speaking as an Israeli. The Americans don't care what we do to the Palestinians. They're not going to let us wreck their order in the Middle East. And I forgot, I'm paraphrasing roughly for the second part there, but essentially he's saying, and he gives all these examples of them just going completely crazy against the Palestinians, and the American government. He's not talking about the American people, but the White House will go ahead and let them do anything. But then he says what crossed the line here was when they not only shot, but shot and missed, trying to kill the negotiators, the Hamas negotiators in Qatar. And America has a very important relationship with that country. We have a big air base there and all this stuff. They bought Trump his shiny new airplane, or they're working on it. I don't think he's got it yet. I don't know. And so that's an important American relationship over there, for what it's worth. Nothing to me, but a lot to them. And so that was where the line crossed. Apparently Trump didn't even mind getting dragged into the Iran war because he kind of wanted to bomb their nuclear program anyway. But Qatar wasn't his plan. And at that point, according to the editor-in-chief of Haaretz, this is where Donald Trump picked up the phone and told Netanyahu, that's it, we're winding this thing down now. And so, and it does go to show the absolutely superior position of the American president to the prime minister of Israel when he puts his foot down. The thing is, there's just so many incentives against them ever telling Israel no, that it has to come down to a crisis like that, where they're really going to upend America's larger priorities. But before they'll do anything.
The one thing about this ceasefire, it reminds me a lot of the one that was from March, where phase one was clearly defined, but then when you got into like the phase 2 and phase 3 of the deal, it became a little murkier. Norman Finkelstein was recently interviewed, and he said this ceasefire deal seemed to be the flimsiest yet, where Israel gets to essentially say whether or not Hamas is laying down its weapons. And then he said, how do you prove Israel right or wrong if they come back to the US and say Hamas is not disarming? What are we doing here? We need to go back in. So, it seems, do you agree that it seems like there's some similarities between this deal and the one that was hatched in March?
Yeah, I think, again, the main difference is the degree to which Trump has put his name on the line for this one, which he can flip-flop around. Last time it was Trump, not the Biden government, that got the ceasefire right before he was inaugurated. Funny how they didn't invoke the Logan Act that time. They weren't framing him for treason with Russia that time. But he got that ceasefire and because he clearly wanted peace. He had, I'm speculating on this, but it's pretty obvious, for anyone to infer that he had told Netanyahu, listen, I want a nice celebration type atmosphere while I'm being inaugurated. So I want you to do the ceasefire for a while, and then I'll let you go back to it in a little while. And he clearly gave him the green light to throw that peace deal away and not go to phase 2 of the talks, but just start the war up again. they didn't even come up with a pretext and claim that Hamas broke the ceasefire. They just started bombing. But this time, I think he is claiming, peace for all time and all this kind of stuff in a way in typical Trumpian hyperbole. But look, and this is important and it's huge, and he has to be supported in this. Of course, we need to all be realistic. Like, this is a guy who's threatening Venezuela right now too, and whatever. He's not Ron Paul, but when he's doing the right thing, he needs to be praised and reinforced that this is what we want to see. He wants to be remembered. He clearly wants to be remembered as a peace president, not a great warlord. If he just wanted to be a great warlord, man, there's God knows we could be fighting. We could have the 3rd Infantry Division fighting their way into Persia right now, right? Or sending the Marines into Venezuela, which, sorry, I shouldn't have even said that out loud. But this kind of thing where, look, he got a ceasefire. He has America has a few other so-called adversary states in the world. Obviously Russia, North Korea, China, and that's basically it. If you want to throw in Venezuela there, but he could get a deal with everybody, with the Ayatollah, with Maduro. We don't need regime change in these places. Sometimes he, in one day, will hawk it up against China, and the next day will say, Chairman Xi's a wonderful guy, and me and him can see eye to eye on so many things, and we're just going to have a wonderful relationship with China going forward, and all these things. So, as he said when he was first sworn in, he goes, they want us to kind of pivot from the Middle East to great power competition with Russia and China. But I say, hey, forget that. Why have great power? Why have any competition? Let's just all in that sense, let's just all get along and have prosperity and capitalism and trade. And we don't have to have sort of a military competition with these other powers at all. And, implying that, hey, if we're not coming at them in an aggressive way, they'll have much less incentive to arm up against us. So let's just go forward, not on a basis of everybody in a Mexican standoff, but in a basis of everybody starting to put their revolvers back down into their holsters,
He mentioned in February he'd love to cut the military budget in half. And He said he would love to get China and Russia to agree to that after he settled some of these things. And we were excited at the Trench Journal. We were like, oh my God, can Trump really? I mean,
so that person is in there, right?
It's in there. But right after he said that, though, all of a sudden it's bombs away over Yemen. It's full support for Netanyahu's revamped war. So it was kind of hard. Trump, you really don't know what you're going to get 1 minute to the next. But I want to get back to Netanyahu, because we just did a trend alert on how he was so invested in total victory. Netanyahu, the entire war, it was total victory. He was vague on what that meant, likely for political reasons, because it's kind of like the George Bush. What does victory mean? But Netanyahu does have to answer to some of his ministers like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and so he does need to keep them happy. He needs to. So it'll be interesting to see how Netanyahu evolves during the ceasefire and how he keeps these people. I mean, I think it was Smotrich went out like 2 days ago and said there will be settlements in Gaza. So it'll be interesting to see the internal politics in Israel and how they embrace the ceasefire. Do you see that being a problem?
Yeah, absolutely. All that is unresolved. I think, the definition of victory, according to Netanyahu and his coalition, was driving the Palestinians out of there. And they were unable to do that. Our guys at antiwar.com have been covering, constantly these efforts to try to convince governments of, especially these war-torn countries. I guess they're presumed to be more desperate and needing the money, but they've gone to Libya, to Ethiopia, to Sudan, to I think even Madagascar. Like in the old early days of the Zionist project, maybe we'll go to Madagascar, and Indonesia. I mean, can you imagine shipping 2 million Palestinians to Indonesia? Well, we need the Lebensraum. Just get on the boxcar, lady. This is fine. It was but the thing is, they couldn't get, and of course Egypt, they couldn't get any of these countries to accept them. Netanyahu had said in May, it's not just Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, it's Netanyahu himself said in May, and we're destroying their homes so they have no homes to return to. We're doing everything we can to get rid of these people, which they, again, failed at. Even if they killed 100,000, they still left 2 million people in the strip. America, nobody was going to let them kill 2 million people and just completely erase the population off the face of the earth. What, just completely napalm everybody in the refugee camps on it? We're going to put up with that. That was too much. We let them kill what, like a Waco worth of people a day, right? Like,
would that have been too much? You think that
Okay.
I'm sorry to interject, Scott. You think that would have been too much for the U.S. because you had people like Ogles in Congress saying turn it into a parking lot. You don't think that Israel? I even spoke to some friends who said, some Jewish friends who said they should have just flattened Gaza right away. And so you think that there wouldn't have been tolerance for that? You don't think in the U.S. if they did that?
I mean, who knows? I guess just only the proof is in the pudding, right? America's government's opinion was the only break on what Israel was going to do. How many and what size bombs do we give them? What coordination? I mean, they don't have B-52s to just dump dumb bombs out of their bellies, carpet bombing, like if you've seen the footage over Vietnam, right? They don't have the ability to do that. And obviously they did bomb a hell of a lot of civilians here, but we're talking approximately 100,000 killed, right? Not, and maybe even a little less than that. And no, I think the outrage would have been, but even, and believe me, I am not spinning for the Israelis here, but because it's its own horrific thing, and it's extremely deliberate, and it's part and parcel of the genocide. But if you look at some of the footage, the drone footage, for example, of the widespread destruction of these cities, many of those areas had been evacuated of people entirely. They had been told, force march, get out first. And they were driven out of their homes, and then their entire neighborhoods and all that were decimated. So when you see all of that footage, not all of those buildings were just inhabited with people going about their daily lives, and it was all destroyed in one big carpet bombing campaign, right? Or something like that, like your imagination might fill in the gaps of what you're looking at there. So we do have, 70,000 people killed officially, right? Because it's like high 60s, and then plus there's like 10,000 missing, presumed dead under the rubble. But not 100, not 500,000 missing, not a million missing, right? It's so just so that people kind of have some kind of grasp on the casualties that we're looking at there. But see, since I'm playing it down, let me play it back up again. All that destruction, of course, was meant to completely destroy their civilization, to destroy their society. So they can't be Palestinians anymore. They can't have Palestine anymore. They can be a refugee in somebody else's country and go die there somewhere. But destroying all their schools, all their hospitals, all their government buildings, so that every paper record of home ownership, property ownership, of family lineage, and health histories, and any kinds of thing, everything is completely decimated. So, like, essentially, the point being to make it beyond the point of rebuilding, so that the Palestinians will finally just give up, which of course they won't do. But that was the goal of it. So then, I'm sorry. So point being, benchmark 1 was get rid of them all. Well, they failed at that. And benchmark 2 was kill Hamas, decimate Hamas, utterly destroy Hamas. And they were unable to do that, because what does that mean? It means kill every fighting age male who would dare to pick up a rifle and resist, who would dare to hide in a tunnel and throw a rock at a tank, as long as they still exist. And how are you going to do that? How are you going to kill them all without killing them all? And the fighting age males with the rest of them, right? And so anyone could have told you that, right? Everybody knows that. My whole life, I've heard this in the aftermath of Vietnam. I was raised in the aftermath of Vietnam. All an insurgency has to do to win a war is not lose, right? As the Taliban said, you have the watches, we have the time. You're going home and we will still be here because we're from here and you're not. And so ultimately, as Ramsey Baroud wrote for us at antiwar.com, that Israel has already lost the war. He wrote that for us in October of 2023, because he said, look, just go back to the last time they did this. In 2014, they sent their ground troops in, and Palestinian fighters popped up out of the rubble and sniped them and shot them and hit them with RPGs, and they turned around and ran. The Israelis are not willing to put their men on the ground to fight a severe enough war, separate out all the men and kill them and whatever crazy thing they have in mind. All they can do is air war, but they're not willing to take the casualties they'd have to take to really get their guys on the ground in there and fight. And so in the end, what happened? After 2 years, this was essentially what? It was like one big, horrible reprisal. They didn't accomplish anything. They didn't destroy Hamas, nothing. They didn't transfer the Palestinian population out of there and create a new beach resort for Jared Kushner to move all the Israeli Jews into. That part isn't happening. Now, they did shrink their border some, and the Israelis will colonize more and more of their farmland on the margin, but that's crap. So in other words, yeah, they failed. Now, as far as any accountability for Netanyahu for doing all this and getting nothing for it, I mean, who knows? He's the longest serving prime minister for, mostly public choice theory reasons. But then again, I think, well, whatever. He's been able to put together parliamentary coalitions over and over again to stay in power because he's got enough different groups who are willing to support what he's doing here. So
this is along what you were just mentioning. This is from The Economist this week. All right. So it says 30 years on from Oslo and after the trauma of October 7, most Israeli Jews see the Palestinian territories as a failed quasi-state with a record of corruption, terrorism, and Jew hatred. In 2012, 61% of Israelis supported two states. Now, perhaps a quarter do, and many display a chilling indifference to the loss of Palestinian life. For their part, Palestinians see Israel as a rogue state committed to occupying their land and routinely unleashing violence. Polled in May, 50% of them, Palestinians, supported the October 7 attacks. 87% denied that Hamas had committed atrocities, and 41% supported armed resistance. So that shows a real clear divide between Palestinians and Israelis. How do we get back to where things are a little bit more tenable or a little bit more possible for coexistence? What do you see needing to happen? Because there seems to be such a hatred between Israelis and Palestinians. How do you move on from where we are right now?
Well, that's a very good question. I think, the real division is in the fact that it's sort of too late. It really is, I think, too late to have a Palestinian state that includes any kind of contiguous territory in the West Bank, on the West Bank. There's just too many settlements, and it would take too much Israeli power to remove those people from there. It would, people have said for a long time, I guess may be true, it would cause a civil war within Israel to force them to undo the settlement project after all this time. Then you want to do a one-state solution where everybody just has equal rights under one state. Well, back to what you just said about the hatred there. The Israelis, I think, are paranoid beyond reason, but they have obviously some reason to fear the backlash of what's going to happen. They seem to think that the Palestinians would just kill them all dead until they're all pushed into the sea and all that kind of crap, which I think is really not true. The Palestinians are not saying all the Jews have to leave. They're saying they want equal rights in the single state with them, and that they should be treated as less than an other just for not being born Jewish and all of that. They're not saying that everyone who is Jewish there has to go, just they're against the ethno-religious chauvinism of the Jewish state at their expense. So, although obviously there are extremely pissed off people and it wouldn't be real easy. On the other hand, people have come up with negotiated solutions to problems like this throughout the world in various times and places, to various degrees of success. You can have something like a binational state, right, where there's one foreign policy. We know the Israeli Jews are never going to let the Palestinians have their own actual military with armored divisions and all these things. They're going to invade them and destroy them before anything got to that level whatsoever. So you could have essentially one foreign policy, but then where the Palestinians have truly their own elected governments, not Palestinian Authority sock puppets, but truly like their own county sheriffs and their own city governments and some kind of state government to rule as with, strong federalism and real autonomy, not under, foreign military occupation by the Israelis on the West Bank there. And they're all different kinds of binational states. So, and then if people can succeed like that over a period of time, living in a binational state, where then there's a precedence for peace. It's been working for a while. Let's let it keep working then. Then you really have something to build on, but you got to start somewhere. You look at Bosnia right now, there's still tensions right now between the Serbs, Republic Srpska, and the Muslim government in Sarajevo. And at least at the time of this recording, everybody's not waking up in the morning and going and killing each other. They're waking up in the morning and going to work. It's been 30 years, and Dayton is a very, imperfect peace deal. And it's full of some pretty bitter compromises that people didn't want to have to make and all that. And a lot of people lost a lot of people in those wars, right? So a lot of them have a lot of grudges in their hearts, but then still they choose to go to work instead of going to war every morning. So it's a question of how do you make it tolerable enough for everybody that they can move forward? And because time's going to keep going on, you can't just have permanent enemies. and especially right next door like that. And, the Israeli Jews have, since the creation of the Zionist project, have been just absolutely so unfair to the Palestinian Muslims and Christians, and have treated them just absolutely horribly, and somewhat vice versa too, although to a much less degree, just maybe due to capability. So there's a lot of hard feelings there that would have to be resolved. But look, again, time keeps moving forward. Yeah, people living in proximity to each other, presumably under, medium-term peace and stability with local security forces, and people trading together, working together and things like that can really help a lot. And then now I'm for, first and foremost, America butting out of all of this. This has got to be everybody else's problem to solve. Not one more dime, but not one more instruction to either side. I would rather have the U.S. government just pretend the old world doesn't exist. Just whatever. So I'm not saying my opinion is this is what the U.S. government should do. I'm just saying what I think, might be reasonable. All other things being equal, what might be reasonable for the situation would be to let Egypt or some kind of consortium of the Egyptians and their allies in the Gulf come in and have some kind of administrative government. I don't know if they'd take full sovereignty like it was between 48 and 67, but somebody take control of the strip other than Hamas so you can rebuild the thing enough that people can live there. Again, I'm not so sure Israel won't just start the war in order to prevent just that from ever happening again, right? As Netanyahu said, I destroyed their homes so they have no homes to come back to. Are they really going to let, the Gulf states build even one nice little town on the strip for people to live in when that could still be theirs? And by the way, the Israelis don't even really care that much about the Gaza Strip. It's the West Bank that they want. It's the West Bank that's Judea and Samaria, according to the Bible, and that God says they're not done taken back yet, but they're going to someday, hell or high water. Gaza is just where they have a problem with Hamas. And as Jared Kushner says, hey, we could have some beachfront property there and all that. But they don't have anything like the zealous religious mandate to take Gaza the way they do the West Bank, so it goes to show if they're willing to go this far over Gaza, what are they willing to do to the people in the West Bank? And Trump has for now said he's forbidden them from annexing the West Bank. But I mean, I don't know what's stopping them, honestly, man. By the end of Trump's term, they could come up with a convincing enough pretext. I think that we could see an attempted cleansing of the West Bank too, that they could just start bombing the cities of the West Bank and trying to drive all the Palestinians out of there into Jordan or into the Sinai Desert to just die of thirst or what.
Hey, Scott, what did you think of Trump and his comments about Miriam Adelson during that ceremony in Israel? Were you surprised by that comment, that he would be so blatant with it, or what was your feeling when you saw it?
So, like in junior college, I took psychology class, and they taught like just that basic id, ego, and super ego thing, and I forgot. I guess it's the super ego is the one that tells your id not to say that out loud, right? And he doesn't have that. He just says whatever he wants, right? And so he was talking about all the things he had done for Israel, and he started reflecting on why he did those things. And the answer was because Sheldon and Miriam Adelson had paid him hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And look, there she is right now. Stand up, Miriam. Say hi to everybody. Take some credit. You're the one who did this, And then I saw where people were saying, I guess is what you're asking, like, was he in a way kind of backhanded calling her out? I think, yeah, no, he's just talking. He's like, one time I asked her if she loved America more than Israel. And she was like, and I was like, hey, wow, I guess that sounds like that really does mean Israel. And then, but he's not thinking deep, like, wow, I wonder what people think that means about me, that I'm willing to take her money and do whatever she says. Oh, well, you know what I mean? Like, he's just not that reflective. He's just kind of freestyling. And I think that is the answer. That is why he recognized Israel's seizure of the Golan Heights. That is why he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. And, the Adelsons were there at the ceremony. And he was like, hey, there you go, guys. I hope you're happy for that thing that I did for you. And look, there's a lot of born-again Christian votes, evangelical votes, and not all of them are Christian Zionists. I shouldn't define it that broadly. There are certain premillennial dispensationalist types who are very wedded to what they see as the fate of Israel and Republican Party politics being dedicated to the future of the Israeli state. So that is a huge issue for any Republican politician, especially president or national member of the House or the Senate from the South. That's a big deal that you got to worry about. But also, that's a hell of a lot of money. And the thing that bothers me about that is that Donald Trump is a billionaire. And no, he's not as wealthy as the Adelsons. But Sheldon's dead anyway, Donald, so you're not in his shadow. And the wife, she just inherited his money. She's obviously, working as a agent of Israeli intelligence here, or their foreign ministry, as an agent of influence to whatever degree. But Donald Trump doesn't have 60 billion, but somebody's got like 4 or 5. The New York Times got a hold of his IRS stuff and said, look, he doesn't have 10, but he's got like at least 4 or 5. And liquid, I don't know, a couple. His children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren are set forever. No question about that. And I don't know how often he said this. He may have only said this once or twice. It's the best campaign shtick. And it clearly he didn't really mean it. It never became like the driving thing, but it would have been like, if you were his Karl Rove, you would have told him, yeah, say that. It's perfect. What he said when he started running in 2015 was, he said, look, I'm already retired. I already won at life. I'm Donald goddamn Trump here, man. I own the world. I'm the best. And I'm doing this now just as out of the goodness of my heart for the love of my country. Otherwise, I'd just be at the golf course chilling out. I'm sacrificing myself for you. And wow, that's some good shtick for a billionaire running for office. He's not going, look, I want power from my corporation to build more weapons with or whatever. He's a real estate tycoon, right? He doesn't have any, he's got these shit coins or whatever. He doesn't have any major interest at stake in terms of his control of the government, right? At least any major personal one, even as a very wealthy man. And so my point being, he could have just written a check to the Republican National Committee to cover his own and all the Senate and all the House races, and hell, all the state Senate and House races and governor races for the next 15 years. Here's a couple of $100 billion. Let's make sure we keep our people in there. Now you don't have to ask the Israelis for anything. Now he starts to worry about the blasphemer, cynical, lying atheist, surely bound for hell, John Hagee, and his mindless clones and their voting patterns. But again, with that much money, I think you can just make it clear to them that John Hagee is an atheist and a blasphemer and is surely going to burn in hell for all eternity for lying to you people, just because he's a blackmailed spy, agent of the Israeli regime. And you don't have to believe all the little red notes in the margin of your Bible anymore. That's all a bunch of nonsense. And then we could just move on from there. In other words, there's no necessity in Donald Trump, having this relationship with Miriam Adelson and Sheldon Adelson before her and the Israeli regime in this way at all. And I think you might remember where he told, I believe it was the Republican Jewish Committee, he was like, I don't need your money. I don't care about you. Back in like 2015, he's like, oh yeah, the Adelsons, they just bought Marco Rubio. Yeah. He's Sheldon Adelson's perfect little puppet, but I don't need you, But then I think someone whispered in his ear, but Congress does need them. And the state houses and state senates do need them. And you're going to pay for all that? And then he went, no, I guess not. But he should have said, yeah, hell yeah, I will. Why not? He can't afford it. He could have made all that back just through his investments anyway. He'd be whole again by now if he'd written those checks. It's bubble times, man. Mr. Inflationary policy. There's his advantage in government control. Lower those interest rates.
Scott, tell me, how do Democrats handle their next election? Because I don't know if you saw it, Gavin Newsom being interviewed, and he said, oh, that's an interesting question when he asked about AIPAC's influence in politics. So and I mean, for Gavin Newsom, who's like this used car salesman who has all the answers, always looks so professional and polished. The guy just like, it seems like you can't startle the guy. For him to descend and watch him unravel during that interview, is this what Democrats can start to expect? And if you worked for a Democrat, and let's say, for example, and this is a serious question, honestly, if you work for a Democrat, you're a campaign advisor, and they don't want to stop taking money from AIPAC. They also don't love what Israel's doing, but they don't want to be banned by AIPAC.
Yeah.
How should Democrats start doing a better job at answering these questions than what we saw out of Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
What would you tell someone?
Yeah, my advice to Democrats is jump out a window. You're doomed. Nothing can help you. You're so screwed. I mean, they're just painted into the world's worst corner, aren't they? The voters of the Democratic Party are so sick of it, they could puke blood. They're so upset about it, they could riot. But the owners of the Democratic Party are just Jewish Zionist billionaires. And no offense, and I'm not using the J word belligerently or like out of turn here. I mean, this is just Wall Street Journal reporting here that's who finances the Democratic Party. Like 2/3 of it or something comes from a small handful of billionaires who are hardcore Zionists. And so the Democratic Party without them doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. But then how are you going to get anybody to vote for you?
Is Mamdani, do you see Mamdani as an example of this trend and how his success, or at least what?
Yeah. I mean, if you live in Michigan, you can get elected anyway, right?
Yeah.
If you're in a safe enough seat, but especially if like running for president, I don't know if you remember this, but it was I think in 2012, was it 2012? Could have been 08. I think it was 12 when they had the Democrat convention was in LA. And the chairman of the thing was it Villarosa was the mayor of LA, something like that. Anyway, so they have this vote, and the vote is for Israel, in favor of Israel. And the yays are like, yay. And then nays are just thunder. They're like in the Lakers stadium or whatever. And it's just thunder, nay, just no. Super duper majority just shouts it down, right? In the deepest boom that they can. And the mayor looks off to the side and he goes, the ayes have it, and like bangs his gavel. It was just preposterous, right? And the place goes, oh, rabble, rabble, rabble. Like everyone was upset, right? So the thing is, like, that kind of thing can only go on for so long. What are you going to do if you're the Democrats? If you're a Democrat consultant right now, you're trying to tell the party, all right, here's how to thread this needle. I don't have advice for you. You're screwed. You're completely screwed. I mean, and it really sucks because I wish that it's really unfortunate that like the further left you go, the better you are on this issue. When really what we need is for all the Zionists to join the Democratic Party and get all the best anti-Zionists out of the Democratic Party and join with the Republicans so that we can have one anti-Zionist party and one pro-Zionist party. And let's have the anti-Zionist party be for capitalism and constitutional government and America instead of a bunch of revolutionary communists.
I'm with Scott Horton. He's the editorial director of antiwar.com. Everyone check out antiwar.com. Every day there's new stories on what's going on in the world on the foreign wars front. It's a great website. So Scott, I just want to move over to now Ukraine and what's going on there. Trump just spoke with Putin today on the phone. He said it was a great conversation, 2 hours, even though it's translated. So it's really could probably be distilled down to 30 minutes of actual interaction. But he said it was a positive, and they're going to be meeting next week in Hungary. And this is after what seemed like real tense rhetoric between Washington, the administration, and the Kremlin with the Tomahawk missile. Is Trump somehow managing to potentially win another ceasefire deal with Ukraine based on this like kind of chaotic diplomacy? What's your take on that, Scott?
Well, look, overall, I remain pessimistic about the situation, but that's like all other things being equal. So then things can change, right? So Donald Trump being very insistent that he wants to find an end to this thing. If he really wants to push that hard, I think maybe he can find a way. Did you just say that the transcript is already out of their meeting? Or just
No, I was just joking because a lot of times they'll always say it's a 2-hour interaction.
I understand what you're saying. It was just half as long as they said.
Yeah, by the time he puts Putin on speakerphone, I think the clock's like still going,
Right.
It was more of a joke.
No, I mean, the headline that I saw was that the plan is for them to meet in Budapest and try to hammer this thing out. Now, first, I'll say what I always say, and then I'll tell you why I hope I'm wrong, at least. What I always say is that Trump just got inaugurated at the wrong time because the Russians are winning the war, but they're winning slowly. And they still have a quarter of Donetsk to seize. And I don't think they want to quit till they do. And yet they're not in a hurry to seize the land. They're actually fighting mostly a war of attrition. They're taking more and more territory, but they're fighting a war of attrition, just chewing up the other guy's soldiers more than anything else, which is the Ukrainian strategy, at least they say as well. Rather than simply fighting over territory, it's an attempt to break the other side. Then you can take whatever you want. But so that still leaves a quarter of Donetsk untaken. So seeing the Russians climb down from that and their declaration that they are going to take all of Donetsk Oblast, I mean, that is, to me, a huge order, not just tall, but 15 feet tall order. I don't know. Then he's got to lean on the Ukrainians that I need, or I guess he's got to lean on the Ukrainians that you guys got to turn around and walk away from that territory that you're still standing on that they haven't taken yet, which is another huge order to get the Ukrainians to bow down to. So then, as far as sticks, he doesn't have much. Biden already tried pouring in all kinds of weapons. We can give them more and more missiles and artillery, whatever, but they don't have the manpower to use much more than what we're giving them already anyway. The Russians have, through mostly electronic warfare, have rendered a lot of our ATACMS missiles and those kinds of things, the HIMARS and ATACMS, obsolete by jamming them and making them miss all the time. And you know, there's a huge battle over drone tech on the battlefield going on right now and all of that. The Russians also are far short of their goals in Zaporozhye and Kherson, I meant to mention. They have about 2/3 of Zaporozhye and about 2/3 of Kherson. And that 1/3 of Kherson they don't control is on the other side of the Dnieper River. So, and by the way, though, the Kremlin has said, I think a couple of times, that they may be willing to negotiate about that, maybe draw the lines where they are. They have their so-called land bridge across the Azov coast there from Crimea to Donetsk, and then also a guarantee of the freshwater resources of the Dnieper River there to Crimea, which the previous regime had cut off. And so it's obviously a major interest of the Russians in keeping that open, that canal open. So, anyway, sorry. Trump has very few carrots to give. Now, you mentioned the Tomahawk missiles. My read on that was, man, you don't really mean to give them Tomahawks. They don't have the kind of launchers they would need. And you're talking about a major escalation and a real risk, because now you got Russian radar operators in the middle of a war seeing Tomahawk cruise missiles come flying in that could be tipped with hydrogen bombs. You know, and also I think there's evidence, if you look at the Syria attack of 2017 and 2018, I think especially 18, looks like the Russians used electronic warfare to knock down a bunch of our Tomahawks there when Trump fell for his second sarin hoax, the third major sarin hoax of the Syrian war in 2018, April 2018. So not so sure how effective those Tomahawk cruise missiles are against the Russians anymore. They've had a lot of time to adapt to them, but then again, they can be refined too. Their software can be finagled. But and then as far as carrots, Trump mostly has an offer of normalization. Come on, man, give us a ceasefire, give us an end of the war, give us a timeout somehow, and then let's get back to normalization. Let's bring Russia back into Europe and back into the West. And that is a huge offer, and it's, to me, absolutely crucial. I can't think of anything more important in the world, quite frankly, than Washington bringing Moscow back, and Moscow being willing to say, okay, let's work together instead of against each other the way it's been. Again, another tall order, but compared to what? We're going to go back to real full Cold War like the bad old days when we just absolutely do not have to. Biden himself said that no Russian leader since whichever Peter the Great or whatever has thrown in with the West as much as Vladimir Putin. And so there's got to be a way to try to rekindle that spirit. But then again, if you're Trump offering that, what assurance does Putin have that the rest of the Washington, D.C. regime is not going to reverse that at their very first opportunity? So if he's going to make a real peace with Russia, I think he's going to have to come up with some real significant, milestones and things that the Russians can show for it, like total sanctions relief, massive economic development projects, working together to develop Siberian resources, get back on the INF treaty, save the New START treaty, maybe make a new and better one regarding nukes in space or whatever the hell you can do. Yeah. And just bring Putin to DC, take him to the ball game, and just, you know what I mean? Like Obama called reset. And like one of those, a serious ass reset where we're just not doing this anymore. We're doing this now because I say so. But being that definitive and following through and making sure that, for example, I saw someone say completely reinvigorating the Russian NATO Council and really giving Russia more of a say in European security affairs and all these things. So that, look, I wrote the book Provoked. Sorry, this is the West's fault, led by Washington, D.C. And it doesn't mean that, oh, the Russians are angels, we should just do whatever they say. But I think if the West treats them fairly, we stand a very good chance of being able to bring them back into the Western fold, and what's the other choice? Just kicking them straight out of Europe into the arms of the Chinese. So now you have, oh no, your big Chinese, at least economic and potentially, global military or political competitor, now armed with all the resources of the Russian Federation that might otherwise flow west instead of south.
I'm sorry, Scott.
No,
Does Beijing want the war to end? Would Beijing be happy if Russia made concessions with their goals to, like you said, normalize relations with the West? Would that play in the realpolitik for Beijing? Would they like that, or are they almost not? I don't want to say happy, because China came out a lot of times saying they want the war to end. Yeah. But what do you think about Beijing? What's their take on Russia ending the war, making concessions to the West?
Yeah, I really am not plugged into, the politics in Beijing, but I can just speculate that it makes sense to me that the way the Americans brag about having the Russians bogged down in a strategic defeat in this long-term fight in Ukraine, that the Chinese might be kind of snickering at America also getting bogged down in a strategic defeat. We spent $300 billion over there, and, have seen the NATO military alliance humiliated and unable to defend their friend and all of this kind of thing. And so it's been a major setback politically, financially, militarily. They've proven the obsolescence of our tanks and just everything. There's all of these kind of cascading things. So I could see them, kind of silently thinking it's funny that America thinks that they're hurting Russia so bad when, our government is really hurting our own society as much as they are as well. And I think also they probably appreciate the fact that Joe Biden kicked Russia right out of Europe and said, well, fine, go trade with China then. And Putin was like, all right, fine. I guess I'll just have to increase my trade with China. That makes sense that China would see it that way. You could even see the whole war with, not just Ukraine as a proxy between America and Russia, but Ukraine is our proxy and Russia is China's proxy in this war in Eastern Europe, in a sense. In using Russia against us in this way. So, but I don't know how they talk about it really. You're right. I have seen them publicly say they'd like an end of the war. They'd like to help negotiate it. Seems like they're trying to be good friends to the Russians there and doing that. But I'm not nearly as clued in. I need to catch up on, I have a couple of Russia experts whose Substack email alerts I receive and never quite get around to reading. So one day I'm going to really catch up. I actually know a couple of guys who are really good on what's the scuttlebutt in Beijing politics. Like, how do they feel about these things? Lyle Goldstein is one who I haven't spoken to in a while, but who's really good on that kind of thing.
My last question to you, Scott, and I guess I'll just get back to what's going on in Israel and Gaza for the last question. And when I was watching Trump being praised as the peacemaker, as this was some kind of an amazing moment, I just kept thinking to myself, I was like, is this going to be the messaging to try to get past what happened in Gaza and how he was behind, or at least gave a thumbs up in March to re-engage in Gaza for Israel? And then Jared Kushner also addressed the crowd in Israel, and he spoke about how he was so proud that the IDF didn't sink to the same level of barbarism as Hamas. And he said that, and he was next to Witkoff and Ivanka Trump. And I watched that as well. And I was like, will that be the message? Because Trump mentioned that he really wants to help Israel rehabilitate its image. And when I was watching that, I was like, is this almost the first step in that process to try to rehabilitate it by making these really vast, huge claims, like Trump is the biggest thing for peace on earth since, whoever. And Israel's moral compass during the whole war in Gaza is just something to be remembered. Yeah. What was your take when you saw it? I guess my first part of that is, if this holds, is Trump should Trump get as much praise as he's getting if the ceasefire holds? And then how do you see Israel rehabilitating its image with the help of Trump?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, he absolutely is complicit in what Israel's been doing for all this time there and bears his responsibility for that. On the other hand, he's going to be sitting in that chair for the next 3.5 years. So that's a situation we got to live with. So he, I think, should be praised and reinforced every time he does anything good in the most, blatant and obvious way, right? Like, that's what makes you so tall and handsome and successful, is that thing that you just did just now that I like. That's what he has to hear. And so I'm all for people, doing that as much as possible. I think there's no erasing what just happened here. And yes, you should expect an absolute avalanche of Hasbara. I saw a clip earlier. I didn't even see the clip. I just saw a tweet about Bill Maher going, "Oh, man, what about what's going on in Sierra Leone? You ever think about that? What about Nigeria?" And just, yeah, pal, you know what? You're not going to be able to get away with whitewashing what you just cheered on Israel doing to the Palestinians by bringing up, "Oh, yeah, what about Nigeria? Give me a break. Boko Haram, yeah. They sure do compare to the Likud armed to the teeth with American planes and bombs. Give me a break." And so I think we're all gonna have to suffer a lot of that, but I think it's not going to work. I think and I'm not sure how it plays out in terms of international politics. It's sort of like we talked about with the Democratic Party, where, boy, they're just between a rock and a hard place, and I don't know where they really go from here. Netanyahu is almost certainly not going to be arrested and tried before the ICC. Hell, for all I know, he'll be the prime minister for another 10 years. On the other hand, it could be a situation where in Israel, they decide, okay, now that the war is over, time for that comeuppance that you've been waiting on here, pal, because he is absolutely corrupt. I don't know if your audience has seen the movie, The BB Files, but it's just videotapes of Shin Bet, the national police, their FBI, interrogating Netanyahu and all of his buddies about all their corruption and all the presence, and his wife, his horrible wife, just absolutely demanding, I forget first, but like definitely champagne and jewelry and all these gifts of really expensive things for their standard of living. And how this is just, there's no question about it. This is just absolutely as illegal as it can possibly be under Israeli law. This is just outright bribery and corruption and influence peddling and this and that, whatever. And he and his wife are just absolutely as guilty as can be. And so that's been a huge part of his incentive to keep the war going, is to keep himself out of court during the emergency. Now, I know people are torn about this because there is a propaganda campaign, especially among liberals, to focus on Netanyahu and say, Netanyahu, he's so bad, he's so bad, he's so bad. And then therefore kind of acquit the rest of Israel, the rest of the regime, the rest of the society that supports it, whatever. And so they say, beware of that. They want to whitewash it by getting a new prime minister in there and then pretending that good old normal Israel is back again. And now we don't have to be so upset anymore, when, of course, there's much more to what's going on than just Netanyahu. Now, there may be a lot to that. On the other hand, there's no runner-up to Netanyahu in Israeli politics who is as talented as him and has the juice that he has in order to get what he needs done, especially in Washington, but also in London and Paris and Berlin and the rest. And this guy is like the Dick Cheney of Israel. There are not many people who compare to his pull. You put Naftali Bennett or Yair Lapid, or let's say Bennett or Avigdor Lieberman. Like, a lot of these guys are very right-wing, very nationalist. Even Ben Gvir or Smotrich, these guys who absolutely have at least as evil intentions as Netanyahu. None of them can come to Washington and force everybody to bow down the way that Netanyahu can. None of them are that politically connected. I mean, he's been so ingrained in Washington since the 1980s and just has everybody's phone number on speed dial and just knows exactly what to do and whose arm to twist and all that kind of thing, in a way where, like, no other prime minister I don't mean ever, but in current Israeli politics, none of his competition could have gotten away with what he just did for 2 years. No way. So yes, it would be unfortunate if he personally took all the blame for everything and then somehow everybody else gets off scot-free or whatever, but whatever, man. We need rid of him as fast as possible. And if Joe Biden had only said and meant it, that I really don't like this Netanyahu and I wish they'd hold new elections over there and let someone else run this war because I just think this guy's incentives are too screwed up. They'd have done it. They'd have held new elections by next Thursday, right? If the president of the United States had insisted.
Yeah, Schumer said that, and that didn't go anywhere. Schumer said that at one point.
No,
I remember.
if Biden had backed
yeah.
him up and said, that's right, this guy's off his rocker, and my intelligence says that he's more worried about going to jail for his personal petty corruption than anything else here. And my intelligence says that they held a meeting where they laughed about, we don't care about the hostages. We just want an excuse to go to war, dude. Don't get the hostages out. That'll take away our excuse to keep the war going. Like, he could have totally ratted him out and overthrown him easy. Or, asked politely for the Israeli body politic to overthrow him, and they would have. If it had come down to it, he shouldn't have even had to do that. I like to post that clip of or it's not audio, but it's a meme of Ronald Reagan talking about how in 1982 he called Menachem Begin, who was also a Likud party, right-wing nationalist, prime minister of Israel, and he told Begin to stop bombing Beirut, and he said, "This is a Holocaust, and the symbol of this war is a 7-year-old girl with her arms blown off," or was it 7-month-old girl with her arms blown off? And he said, "I demand that you stop it right now." And then Begin stopped in 15 minutes. And then I believe it was Michael Deaver that worked for Reagan, said that Reagan turned to him and said, "Wow, I didn't know I had that kind of power. I can make him stop that easily." It was all it took. And he wrote in his diary, and people can read this at Ronald Reagan's diaries. Like, just Google the Ronald Reagan Begin. It's spelled just like begin. Ronald Reagan Begin Holocaust. It'll come right up in Ronald Reagan's diaries at ronaldreagan.com or ronaldreaganarchive.org or whatever, his museum, whatever. They have the diary entry there where he wrote in his diary, "I called Menachem Begin. I used the word Holocaust deliberately and advisedly and told him he had to stop it, and that the symbol of the war was a 7-month-old with her arms blown off." So that comes from Reagan himself. And by the way, if you search in Israeli media, you can find where Begin also talked about that conversation and confirmed the conversation from his side of it as well. That, wow, Reagan used the H word on me and told me that I better stop. So I did.
Well, Scott Horton from the Liberty Institute, antiwar.com.
I'm sorry. I hate to correct you, but the Liberty Institute is actually a foreign NGO founded by and funded by George Soros, and I am not any way associated with that.
I said Libertarian Institute, right? It's Libertarian.
Yeah.
Yep. Libertarian.
No, how dare he name his institute that? That's the problem.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining the Trends Journal. We'll put some links below the video so that people can follow you on X and everything. I always appreciate your time, Scott.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.